She started leaving her fork on the rim of the plate like it weighed more than the food, like gravity had shifted in the kitchen, and no one told me except the way the metal made that quiet tap against ceramic that wasn't there before. Our dinners got smaller, not in portion but in presence. The steam still rose off the rice, the salmon still flaked under a fork, the wine still drew its slow red circle in the glass, but everything felt like a rehearsal of a life rather than the life itself. We live in a small place that pretends it's larger when it rains, the windows fog, the streetlights smear themselves into longer versions of their own shadows, and somewhere in all that, the hum of traffic becomes a lullaby if you're not careful. She was careful, I wasn't. There were signs, of course, the subtle kind that don't announce themselves. A second phone buzz she silenced without looking. The new care with hair she didn't have time for 6 months ago. A sweater I hadn't seen before in a color she once said made her look tired. The coffee smelled sweeter lately. She switched beans but didn't tell me. The mornings were her territory. She started waking up before dawn, the kettle's thin whistle like a question left on the doorstep. She moved softer, as if guilt had a weight you could distribute across floorboards. Thursday nights used to be for us, takeout. A terrible show we pretended to hate but quoted all week. She started working late on Thursdays, then Tuesdays. Then the nights blurred together and I told myself this was what marriage does when two people are trying their best. I remember the first time she kissed me with her eyes open. It was quick, a peck, but I felt watched rather than held. That's how you learn something has come into your house without knocking. It starts with a gaze that takes inventory. The discovery wasn't cinematic. No lipstick on collars, no dramatic text flashing across a screen in neon red, just a receipt, crumpled in the pocket of that new sweater. A hotel bar, the kind downtown that serves cocktails in heavy glasses, the ones that make your hand feel serious. 2 drinks, a room charged with the same timestamp. I stood at the kitchen counter with the paper wet from my palm and listened to our refrigerator hum like it had a secret. The rain outside had that insistent rhythm that makes you want to confess just to be in harmony with something. I didn't confront her that night. I folded the receipt back into the sweater pocket like a message in a bottle returned to the sea. I watched her come home and kick off her shoes without looking up. She put her bag on the chair she always put her bag on. Rituals survive even when love starts to rot. When she showered, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the gap between the curtains. The city leaked in through that thin slit, a lone horn from somewhere far, a pedestrian light clicking, the dull sigh of tires on wet asphalt. I thought about the way grief begins long before it knows its name. She smelled like hotel soap, not ours, citrus and something metallic. When she lay down, she kept to her side in a careful geometry, as if bodies were blueprints you had to respect or the whole house might collapse. I slept poorly, dreams of rooms I couldn't enter, keys that didn't fit. A door knocker that beat like a heartbeat against wood I didn't recognize. I woke before the sun and watched the ceiling turn from charcoal to ash to an ambiguous gray that felt like a verdict delivered in a whisper. When I finally asked, I did it over coffee, not as strategy, as accident. I said her name softly and it sounded like someone else's voice. "Are you seeing someone?" The cup hovered halfway to her mouth. Her eyes dropped, then rose. The quiet was longer than the question. She said it fast, like ripping a bandage she knew wouldn't spare the wound. It was just one night. The word just fell between us like a coin, small, but it made a sound that kept ringing. I stared at the steam curling off her mug, how it rose and dissolved, and it felt like a diagram of everything I couldn't hold. She reached for my hand and stopped herself halfway. That was the worst part, the almost. The restraint born of a guilt that still argues for its own dignity. I didn't ask for details, and she offered none. It didn't mean anything, she said, as if meaning were the only soil where betrayal could grow. I wanted to tell her that sometimes the wound is the shape of the absence, not the presence, but the words stuck to the roof of my mouth. We ate dinner that night in parallel silence. The forks scraped. The clock ticked with unusual confidence. I realized then that the world does not pause for heartbreak. It multitasks, it continues. It waters the plants and rotates the earth and expects you to keep up. After she fell asleep, I stood in the doorway and watched her breathing. It was steady, as if sleep had granted her a temporary innocence. I felt old suddenly, not in years, but in years spent trusting. There's a kind of collapse that doesn't make noise. The kind where you're still standing, still moving, still answering emails and washing dishes, but inside the architecture has given way, quiet and final. I brushed my teeth, turned off the bathroom light, and in that darkness I felt the floor tilt under me. In the morning, rain wrote its soft Morse code against the window. She reached for my shoulder, hesitated, and then pulled her hand back under the blanket like a truce flag withdrawn. "We can fix this," she whispered. Her voice trembled on the last word, fix, as if it were fragile enough to cut her tongue. I nodded because nodding is easier than bleeding in daylight. "We'll talk tonight," I said. But as she left for work, she paused at the door and looked back with eyes that asked for mercy and permission at the same time. After she was gone, I opened the window and let the air in. It smelled like wet pavement and someone else's cologne carried up from the street. I realized I had been keeping the windows closed for months. The receipt was still in the sweater pocket. I took it out, smoothed it flat, and read the name of the hotel again. The letters didn't look like part of our alphabet. They belonged to a language where love is measured in hours and anonymity. The phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. It stopped, then again, a text, then a call. The name that popped up was a first name I didn't recognize, and my stomach recognized it for me. I let it ring until the sound felt like it was happening inside my bones. Then I answered. I didn't speak, neither did he, just breath on both ends of a wire, and then a low voice, careful and almost kind. We should talk. The rain grew louder, like applause for a scene I never auditioned for. I said nothing. The line stayed alive between us, a living thing that neither of us knew how to feed. The kettle began to boil behind me, steam threading into the room, and in that thin fog, everything felt suspended. Words, decisions, the future. The voice on the phone broke the stalemate. I didn't know she was married. I closed my eyes, felt the world shift half an inch, and for the first time since the receipt, I said something that sounded like mine. Where? He told me a place. Nearby, a cafe with a window that always fogged on rainy days. I said a time. He agreed. When I hung up, the house sounded too quiet, like someone had muted the city. I set the receipt down beside the phone, next to a mug, leaving a ring that would stain if left long enough. I watched the ring darken, spread, and stop. The moment made a shape I didn't yet have a name for. At 3, I took my coat from the hook, slid the receipt into my pocket like a talisman against becoming someone I didn't recognize. I paused at the door the way she had, looked back at the room that had carried our lives, and realized I didn't know if I was leaving or being left. I stepped into the rain, and the city swallowed me with the indifference of a crowd that had seen this story before. As I walked, I rehearsed questions that sounded like accusations and answers that sounded like confessions, but by the time I reached the cafe window, all I had were my hands, trembling, around a paper cup that smelled like something warm and merciful. He was already there, clean-shaven, a jacket too thin for the weather, eyes that couldn't hold still. He stood when I approached, then sat, then stood again. The chair legs scraped, a small violence that felt bigger than it was. He said my name. I said his. We tried to be people who talk. The fog on the glass turned the city into a watercolor, and our reflections looked like versions of ourselves we didn't want to meet. He said, I'm sorry. The words ran between us like water finding the lowest point. I wrapped my hands tighter around the cup, felt the heat bite the skin, and waited for the apology to cool into something else. Outside, a bus hissed to a stop. A couple ran, laughing, under a shared umbrella. The woman's head tipped back, her hair was the same length as my wife's. Something inside me braced itself, the way you do before a wave. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice low. It wasn't just one night. The cup trembled, the fog on the window thickened. His mouth kept moving, but for a moment, all I could hear was the hum of the cafe refrigerator and the rain and a sound inside my chest that might have been my name falling down a stairwell. And then he said the date, last Thursday, which was ours, which she traded like a small coin in a dark hallway. Something in me went very still, like snow that falls after midnight and makes the whole street hold its breath. I set the cup down, slow, precise, so the lid wouldn't pop. He waited for me to speak. I didn't. The quiet stretched, thin as wire, ready to sing or snap. Cliffhanger. I reached into my pocket, took out the receipt, slid it across the table toward him, and said softly, then tell me everything, as the cafe lights flickered once in a brief, electric shiver. He talked like a man carrying something fragile across a crowded room. Short sentences, pauses, careful steps, a name I knew, hers, stuck to other details I didn't. A bookstore 2 blocks from her office, a corner table at a wine bar with a view of a brick wall they pretended was romantic, messages that started with articles and ended with hours. I learned the geography of their days, how she rearranged her commute like a puzzle to make space for an hour that was supposed to be harmless and turned into a habit. How they laughed at the same bad lines, hated the same commercials, built a tiny, ridiculous intimacy out of crumbs. He kept saying he didn't know. No ring on her finger the days she wasn't wearing it. No photos on her social media that looked like a husband, just scenery and coffee cups and sunsets. He believed what he wanted to believe because she made it easy, and because wanting is its own kind of evidence when you're lonely. I sipped coffee that had gone cold and tried to feel my feet on the floor. The room smelled like milk and cinnamon, and I thought about all the small comforts in the world that could not fix a single big thing. He told me it wasn't love, not for him, not in the way that matters. It was escape, attention, the animal thrill of being seen. He said it with shame burning behind his eyes like a pilot light that never goes out. I didn't punch him. I didn't want to. Violence would have given shape to something that deserved fog. He looked at the window more than at me, like he couldn't choose which life to face. I asked for the messages, not to read every word, but to see the truth in shapes, timestamps, patterns, the erosion of boundaries measured in emojis and ellipses. He scrolled, hesitated, handed me the phone. My hands were steady. I hated that they were. There it was, my wife in pixels, laughing in text, the language we use when we're safe enough to be stupid. A joke about rain on a Thursday. A photograph of her hand on a cup I recognized. An inside joke that I wasn't inside. The cafe noise lifted and fell, a tide, and in that texture I felt something like grief sit down beside me, companionable, heavy. He pulled the phone back as if he'd shown me a painting that could damage us if we stared too long. "Why are you telling me?" I asked. It was an accusation. Not exactly. It was curiosity edged with exhaustion. He swallowed. "Because she told me you knew. Because I can't be the person who lets you drown quietly." We sat in the kind of silence that isn't empty. Outside, the bus moved on. The umbrella couple was gone. A woman with a dog in a raincoat walked by like a joke, trying not to be funny. I thought of our apartment, of her toothbrush leaning toward mine like they whispered at night, of our couch with its soft dip in the middle where we fit together without thinking, of the plant by the window that thrived in neglect. "End it," I said, "if it isn't already." He nodded fast, too fast, like a man grateful for an order. "It's over," he said, and I believed him because ending things is easier when you're not the one who owes an apology at home. We didn't shake hands. He stood first. He left with his jacket unzipped, rain slipping inside like a penitent. I watched him cross the street, small in the gray, and felt a thinning inside me, a thread pulled through skin. That night the apartment pulsed with her absence even before she arrived. I walked from room to room like a custodian taking inventory after a small fire. Nothing looked damaged if you didn't know how it had been. I found traces, a receipt in a coat that wasn't hers, a tech conference lanyard in the wrong drawer, an extra key on the ring by the door that didn't belong to a lock I owned. Not evidence so much as suggestions, like the understory of a forest you only see once you kneel. I washed the dishes slowly, each plate a small absolution. Water ran, the window fogged, the city hummed like a machine unfazed by my heart's gears grinding air. In bed, I lay on my back and stared into the dark until my eyes made shapes that weren't there. Sleeplessness is its own hallucinogen. At 3, the fridge cycled on. At 4, a siren wrote a thin red line across the night. At 5, I stood in the kitchen and watched the color come back to the world in reluctant degrees. Grief has a geometry, it narrows you. It turns a large life into a corridor. But in the corridor you notice details, paint chips, the sound of your own breath, the way a morning can smell like metal and mercy at the same time. I started running, not far, just enough to make my lungs remember the burn of being alive. Rain stung my face in light needles. My shoes slapped the puddles and made small crowns that vanished as quickly as they appeared. I came home with a resolve that didn't feel like anger so much as clarity. There are only so many rooms you can pace before you decide which door you'll walk through. I cleaned the apartment like a ritual, fresh sheets, trash out. A bowl of fruit on the counter, arranged like evidence that care still mattered. When she came home, she moved carefully as if the air might break. We made dinner together without choreography, hands reaching for the same knife, the same salt, and flinching back like magnets flipped the wrong way. We ate, the clock kept time. The plant by the window reached a little further toward the thin light. When she set down her fork, it didn't tap, it rested. The small mercy made my chest ache. "I met him," I said. I watched the words hit her like a wave she didn't see. She didn't ask where. She didn't ask why. She looked at the table as if it might offer a script. "He said it wasn't just one night." I kept my voice low. "The truth doesn't require volume to be true." She closed her eyes, and when she opened them they were wet, not with tears yet, but with the promise of them. "I was lonely," she said. The words sounded like theft. "Of course you were," I wanted to say. We both were, but loneliness is not a permission slip. "I ended it," she added quickly, as if speed might redeem sequence. "I ended it before you knew." I thought of timestamps, of Thursdays, of a man who apologized to me like he had been practicing. I nodded, because nodding is easier than narrating your own unraveling. I stood, took our plates, ran water. She joined me at the sink and our shoulders almost touched. Almost. Later in bed we lay on our backs like two people auditioning for statues. "Do you want me to go?" she asked into the dark. The question floated above us, a balloon we were both too tired to pull down. "I don't know yet," I said. The honesty felt like a bruise pressed. "But we can't live in this half-light." She made a sound that could have been a sob or a laugh. "I don't know how to be with you when I've hurt you like this," she whispered. "Then don't try to be with me," I said. "Try to be true." The sentence surprised me, not because it was wise, but because it sounded like a person in the process of becoming one. We fell asleep inches apart. At some point in the night, her foot found mine and rested there like a small admission of a larger crime. I let it stay. Forgiveness will sometimes borrow the shape of a gesture long before it owns the feeling. At dawn, I woke to the smell of coffee. The old beans are beans. She must have ignored the new bag sitting smug on the counter. The rain had softened to a mist that made the world look merciful. I stood at the window with my mug and watched the traffic thin. Somewhere below, a shopkeeper dragged a metal grate up with a sound like a zipper across the morning. The city readied itself, indifferent to the fact that I had learned the weight of the word just. My phone buzzed. A new email, a rental listing I'd saved months ago and forgotten. A small place across town with good light in the mornings. I clicked the photos and felt something like oxygen enter a room I'd kept sealed. I didn't make a decision. I made a list, things I would ask her, things I would accept, things I would not. I wrote them with a pen that had been in our drawer since the first year, the ink a little dry, the line imperfect, honest. Cliffhanger. I placed the list on the table and sat across from her as she walked in from the shower, hair damp, eyes brave, and said, "We need rules if we're going to try," as the morning light caught the ring on her finger and made it flare like a question. We called it a separation without leaving, a border drawn across a one-bedroom apartment with blue painter's tape only we could see. We slept in turns on the couch, not out of punishment but circumference. We needed space to walk around our own hurt. The rules were simple, and that was the point. No contact with him, transparency without surveillance, counseling even if the word felt like admitting defeat to a stranger with a plant on their desk, time alone that wasn't a euphemism. She agreed to each one with a nod that felt like a stitch, but stitches need time, and even then, scars make their own weather. Our conversations turned into small bridges over deep water. We spoke about what we ate when we'd be home, what the week needed, and sometimes, between those piers, we would lay a plank of meaning. "I miss you," said without entitlement. "I'm angry," said without theatrics. The counselor's office smelled like lemon cleaner and compromise. We sat on a couch with a bowl of polished stones on the low table, as if the stones might model endurance. The counselor asked questions that felt like she was passing us lanterns, and we were deciding whether to use them. "Why him?" I asked finally, the way a person asks a door to explain its hinges. She stared at the carpet, a pattern of little squares, pretending not to repeat. "He looked at me like I was a beginning," she said. "I wanted to feel new." I thought about how marriage is the place where newness goes to turn into depth, if you let it. And how depth can feel like drowning if you forget how to breathe together. My voice surprised me again. "I stopped seeing you too," I said, "not with someone else, with everything else. Work, screens, assumptions, the organ music of routine." Her face broke in a way that was quieter than crying. "I kept waiting for you to notice I was waiting," she said. The sentence sat between us and folded its hands. We didn't forgive each other in that room. Forgiveness doesn't like to be watched, but we recognized shapes in the fog, and sometimes recognition is the first gate that opens without a key. Days passed like cautious animals. She came home on time. She cooked the meals she knows make me feel like a childhood I barely remember. I fixed the chair that wobbled for a year. We made eye contact that didn't flinch. Then came the text, not from him. From an unknown number with a photo attached. A picture of her taken across a street, head tilted toward a man with a beard that wasn't mine. Not a touch, not a sin, but proximity that stung anyway. I looked at the time stamp. Lunchtime outside her office. She saw my face before she saw the phone. "It's my coworker," she said quickly, then more slowly. "My boss." The word boss is a complicated one in an apartment where power has already frayed. I took a breath deep enough to steady a table. "Did you tell him no?" I asked, to any part of a story that begins with me hurt. "I did," she said, and her eyes held steady. "I told him I'm not available for anyone's attention, including yours when it looks like ownership." The rebuke found its mark because she was right and because truth hurts less when it arrives late. I nodded. The room exhaled. The rain began again, soft against the glass like a rehearsal for release. That night she knocked on the bedroom door before entering, a courtesy that felt like a gift in a place we'd both once believed was all ours. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded like someone about to pray, and said, "I want to come back." Return is a strange word. It implies leaving, yes, but it also implies the road is still there. I thought about the bed's dip in the middle, the bathtub sink, the plant now a little wild with green. I thought about the man in the cafe in his thin jacket, about my list on the table. "What does coming back mean?" I asked. Her shoulders lifted, fell. "It means not asking you to pretend," she said. "It means answering any question you can bear to ask and not offering what will only poison you. It means time. It means I don't call the night just anything ever again." We were quiet for a long moment. The house seemed to lean closer to hear. I touched the blanket, the small pills of fabric from years of our knees and our sleep. She watched my hand like it might be a bridge lowering. "Okay," I said finally. The word was smaller than the world it was asked to hold, but it was a beginning, and beginnings have their own gravity. She slid under the covers with a carefulness that made me want to weep, not for sadness, but for the precision of trying. We faced opposite walls, our backs a geography we both knew by heart, and somewhere in the middle, warmth started to take shape without us touching. In the mornings, she made coffee with the old beans. She placed my mug on the table without looking at me too hard, the way you place a bandage, firm but not possessive. I started running further, past the river. Over the bridge where the city becomes a line on the horizon and the air tastes a little cleaner for no good reason. We told our families nothing and everything. Rough patch, we said, which is the code for we are unbuilding and rebuilding ourselves with our bare hands and the tools are dull. One evening, the power went out in the building. We lit candles we didn't know we still had. The room glowed the way rooms used to glow when people looked at each other more, when shadows did the listening. She read to me from a book we never finished. I closed my eyes and let her voice move across the air like a promise. After in the dark, she said, "I am sorry." The words landed where forgiveness might someday live. "I know," I said. Which wasn't forgiveness, but it was a place forgiveness could walk without tripping. Weeks passed. The counselor asked, "What are you holding that you don't have to?" I surprised myself by answering, "The story of a man I don't want to be." She nodded, the kind of nod that says there's more door behind the door. My phone buzzed again, late, as if the night had a question. A message from an account with no name. "She told me she chose you," it read. A second later, "Take care of her." No more, no less. I stared at those words long enough to feel their edges dull. I deleted the message, not out of mercy for him. Out of mercy for the version of me that kept trying to keep all the fires lit. On a Sunday morning, the rain finally stopped. The city smelled like tin and distant bread. We walked to the farmer's market and bought peaches that bruised if you looked at them too hard. She touched my elbow when a stroller veered, a reflex more than a claim. At home, we ate the fruit over the sink, juice running down our wrists, laughing quietly at the mess because sometimes laughter is the only clean thing you have. She reached up, thumb to my chin, wiped a line of sweetness, and in that small gesture a whole season changed. That night she moved closer in bed, not careful now but present. "Is this okay?" she asked. "The question is a love language." I said yes, and we ended the day with our foreheads touching, the kind of intimacy that asks nothing of the future but this moment. Still, somewhere under it all, a quiet tension remained, not the sharp wire from before, but a soft cord tied to a door I hadn't opened. I dreamed of a key again, this time one that fit, but I didn't turn it. Not yet. Cliffhanger. A week later, early morning, I stood at the window with my coffee as the first clear light since the rain poured across the buildings, and I felt, suddenly and without warning, that I needed to let her go, even as I heard her footsteps approach behind me. The morning was quiet in a way that didn't feel empty, the kind of quiet birds make before they decide to start the day. The city beyond the glass was cleaned by days of rain, edges sharpened, colors turned down to a palette human eyes can forgive. She stopped beside me at the window, close enough to share my reflection but not so close that our silhouettes fused. In the glass we were two dark shapes framed by light, neither of us owning the morning, both of us borrowed by it. "I had a dream," I said, because sometimes the only way to speak a truth is to wrap it in the fabric of something that can't be disputed. I was in our old kitchen from the first place, the one with the two low cabinets. You were there and you were leaving, and I wasn't sad. I was relieved, not because you were gone, because you were allowed to go. She nodded like people do when they don't trust their throats. Her hand touched the windowsill, fingers tapping a slow, irregular rhythm, like rain that forgot its pattern. "I had one too," she said. "I was in a room full of light, and you were at the door, and you had keys in your hand, and you smiled, not at me, but at the door, and you said, 'This opens both ways.'" We stood with our dreams between us like maps we both recognized. The kettle clicked off in the kitchen, a neighbor's door shut, somewhere a bus sighed into motion. "I think," I said carefully, "we've been trying to build a version of us that can undo what happened, instead of accepting that we are not who we were. I think holding you here next to me as proof that I survived isn't the same as loving you now." Her eyes shone. "I've been afraid to tell you I feel that too," she said. "Because if you said you didn't, I would have stayed anyway, and I don't want to stay by default." The plant by the window brushed the glass in a draft, a small green gesture that looked like a wave. I laughed softly at nothing. She did too. It felt like laying a stone down. "I don't want to punish you with my choosing," I said. "I want to honor us with it." The sentence sounded like something a better version of me had been saving for me to find. We made coffee. We sat at the table where I had once set down a list like a treaty. The cups were warm in our hands. The light came in without apology. We talked about logistics, the way people do when the heart has already made the decision. Short-term leases, splitting the books we loved and the ones we'd pretended to. which nights would make loneliness feel like practice rather than punishment. She asked about the ring. I told her to keep it if it made her remember something good, to sell it if it made her forget something true. She turned it on her finger slowly, and for once the gesture didn't look like a plea, it looked like inventory. We cried, but quietly, the way grown people do when the crying is not a request. She put her hand on mine and didn't try to interlace fingers. I squeezed once and let go first. That, too, felt like an honoring. Afternoon turned the room softer. We packed a box each, not because she was leaving that day, but because touching the objects changed the air. A mug from a trip where we were kind to each other without trying. A scarf that still smelled like winter and cinnamon. The photo strip from a booth where our heads didn't fit in the frame and we laughed about it for 3 days. She found the list I had made weeks ago. She read it and smiled, a real one that reached the place grief had once guarded. "You did good," she said, and it wasn't about staying or leaving. It was about becoming someone who could do both without cruelty. We ate dinner together, simple the way apologies are simple when they are done right: soup, bread, and apple cut into slices. She washed, I dried. We didn't bump into each other once. Night fell without drama. We walked to the park and sat on a bench where we had once planned a future that did not look like this one. The fountain kept its small, stubborn music. A dog ran in clumsy circles until it fell into the grass, triumphant. "Do you hate me?" she asked, and the question held no drama, only a desire to know which shelf to put her guilt on. "No," I said, "I love you, and that is not a reason to stay." We sat with that. It did not break us. It did not save us, it just was. Back home, we stood in the doorway like people leaving a museum after seeing a painting that changed something small but permanent. "When?" she asked. "Soon," I said. "But not tonight." We smiled at the same time, the way we used to when a joke arrived without effort. We slept, this time facing each other, not as lovers but as witnesses. In the morning, the light came in early and kind. She reached across the small country between us and touched my cheek with 2 fingers, a benediction. "I'm sorry," she said again, and it was new this time, not because the words had changed, but because we had. "I forgive you," I said, and felt the sentence land without fanfare, a soft body finding its resting place. We made breakfast together, one of those quiet, abundant ones reserved for Sundays or goodbyes. The toast was perfect. The eggs remembered how we liked them. The coffee tasted like the first year. At the door, she picked up the box she'd packed. She looked around like people do when they want to take a room with them, and then she looked at me the way you look at a person when you realize they are real and finite. "Thank you," she said, for what neither of us specified. She stepped into the hall. I didn't follow her. I stood in the doorway and listened to her footsteps diminish down the stairs, each one a measure of our courage. I went to the window. The city was awake, no rain. The morning had that pale, firm light that makes everything look a little truer than it does at noon. A chair sat where she had left it, a little askew. I straightened it, not out of control, but out of care. I opened the window. Air came in cool and unscented. I breathed it like something earned. The plant brushed the glass again. The room was quiet, then not. Somewhere, a neighbor laughed. Somewhere else, a pan hit a counter and someone swore softly and then laughed too. Forgiveness without reunion is not a failure. It is a particular kind of love that stops asking to be paid back. I let that thought settle in the room like dust that looks golden when the light hits it right. I made another cup of coffee. I sat at the table where we had negotiated, mourned, tried, and decided. The chair across from me was empty, and for the first time in months, the emptiness did not accuse me. It invited me. The doorbell rang. I didn't jump. Packages happen. Life keeps bringing small things to your door even when the big thing has already left. I signed. I thanked the courier. I closed the door and leaned my forehead against the cool wood for a moment that did not ask for words. When I lifted my head, the room was the same and not the same. My cup steamed. The chair waited. The morning held. I whispered into the quiet, not her name, not a prayer, but a simple sentence, equal parts ending and beginning. "Okay." Unresolved quiet moment. The kettle clicked on by itself from its timer, and in the hush before the boil, the whole apartment felt suspended, like a held note, like a breath you finally choose to release. Release.